Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the second half of our doubleheader today. It's an amazing opportunity for us to have two great CEOs here with us today, Charlie Denson and now Crystal Maggelet. Both of these great alumni of Utah State University have honorary doctorates from this university. So, Dr. Maggelet, we're very happy to have you. Won't you join me in welcoming Crystal Maggelet with us today? So I've been privileged to know Crystal now for about 10 years. And she's been serving on our National Advisory Board, and so I've had a chance to watch her career develop. And I want to tell you just a little bit about her, and then we'll sort of jump into some questions and then open it up for the students to ask questions. But we honored Crystal with our Distinguished Executive Alumnus Award in 2008, in October of 2008, for the work that she had done as an entrepreneur in establishing the Crystal Inns. I'm sure most of you know about the Crystal Inns, and I think you had, what, 14 or 15 of them? 14 of them. And it was, it was great to be able to honor her for that outstanding success. That was in October of 2008. Little did she know, or the world know, or anybody know, that by Christmas of that same year, she would be being called into action to rescue the company that her father established, which was Flying J. Which got hit by literally a perfect storm of challenges that drove the company into bankruptcy. And I'm not sure what your total indebtedness was at that time. It was big. 1.8 billion. You probably can give us several more digits.
I thought it was 400 at the time that I did that, but in the end it turned out being 1.8 billion. 1.8 billion.
I remember having a conversation with Peter Huntsman that Christmas, that very same Christmas. And Peter, of course, is the CEO of Huntsman Corporation, and he said, if the family doesn't step in and take over, they're going to lose everything. And Crystal did step in and take over and assumed responsibility for the day-to-day action. Now, you might ask yourself the question, what gave her the confidence to do that? And the answer is that she'd been trained all her life to do that. You probably didn't realize that at the time.
I did not realize that.
But would you agree with that statement?
I would agree with that statement, not knowing I was being trained.
Not knowing that you were being trained. So tell us, what do you think, Crystal, were the elements that enabled you? And let me just fast forward just a little bit. So Crystal stepped in, immediately assumed the responsibilities, identified the critical resources that she needed to have, one of which was she had to, talk to the lenders and the financial people, and headed back to New York and established credibility with the financial community, and literally came up with a rescue plan, took the company into and out of bankruptcy, and was it how many months later that you emerged? 18 months later, emerged out of bankruptcy and paid off all of the indebtedness that the company owed, plus interest. So it wasn't, boy, I got to be a little careful. It wasn't Trump-like, where you go into bankruptcy and you say, sayonara, guys. She took it into and out of bankruptcy and paid off 100% of the indebtedness with interest. It's an amazing story. So, okay, now tell us, how did you prepare yourself, or what were the things that enabled you to be ready to do that?
I think it's really simple what enabled me to be ready to do that, because when I was sitting here at Utah State and wondering what I would be, or even if I go back before that, as I was a high school student growing up in a family where my dad ran a business, and I had no idea really what I wanted to be. But somehow, early on in my life, and I think a lot of this came from visiting with adults, I established that even if I didn't know exactly what I wanted to be, if I continued to progress my education and be ambitious and have confidence in myself, that things would work out. And I didn't know really any other way to be from that because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I came from a family of business. Really that's all that I'd seen. My mom had been in business, my dad had been in business. So I migrated towards business, and I went to college to get a business degree. I started here at Utah State. I finished at Pepperdine. I started my career. I ended up working for Flying J early on in my career after college graduation because I didn't know what else to do, and it was the easy thing for me to step into in my family's business. But I knew that I needed to grow and learn more, and so again, I said, and I think it was the ambition I had that said, you know what, I need to keep bettering myself, I need to keep growing and learning, and I was given the opportunity to go to Harvard Business School, and I said, I'm going to do that. Again, coming out of Harvard Business School, again, I had, what do I do now? I have a Harvard Business degree, and and kind of looking for opportunities, and my father came to me and said, hey, I have, you can come to Salt Lake, and I would like to build a hotel and be your partner. And I was like, hey, that sounds like a great idea. So if you kind of follow the pattern of what I'm talking about, it really is that whenever I had an opportunity, I jumped in. And the reason I was able to jump in, I believe, is I had confidence that I could do anything. And I believed I could do anything. And I hope that wasn't an ego. I really pride myself and I hope that I don't have a big ego about it. But I really believed and wanted to keep doing more and more and more. And because I didn't have, and I do think it's a luxury if you have a passion or a focus early in life, I think that's great. But I think so many of us don't. And for me, preparing myself for what I didn't know I was preparing myself for was really just taking every opportunity that I had and always trying to do the very best I could along the way. So when I was an undergrad, for instance, I didn't know that I would want to get a graduate degree, and I actually probably thought I wouldn't want to get a graduate degree, but I really wanted to do the best I could, so I had great grades in college, and I participated, I worked along the way, and in the end, I ended up wanting to get a master's degree. So if I had gone to my undergrad and thought, you know what, I'm not ever going to want to get a master's degree, so I'm going to have fun here, and I'm not going to work hard, and I wouldn't have had those additional opportunities. And so I really think the thing that prepared me for what I ended up doing at Flying J really was as simple as every time I had an opportunity, I took it and I did my very, very best to be the best I could be and had confidence that I could accomplish whatever I set my mind to.
This turnaround at Flying J is really extraordinary. It's now another business case study at Harvard Business School. As you've cooperated with them. Have they taught it yet for the first time?
They'll teach it February 6th.
And you're going to go. You're going to go back for that.
I am.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Crystal and I share an experience of having been at Harvard Business School, and I wish I could be there that day to see the case study taught. What will be the focus of the case study?
The case study is actually going to focus a bit on the bankruptcy, but I believe it's actually, I've read it, actually I know this, it's going to focus more on where we are today because the bankruptcy ended in July of 2010, so it's 6.5 years behind us, and we've had an amazing 6.5 years. And so the case is actually a lot more about picking up the pieces than about the actual bankruptcy and how we got through it.
So tell us a little bit, bring us up to date. I know in 2012 you acquired Maverick, which was the other part of the family business that your cousins had actually been running, and now you've got 100% of Maverick, don't you?
Yes, we do.
And how many stores, do you call them stores?
Yeah, we do.
How many stores do you have of Maverick?
We will have 300 by January, 283. We're opening a lot in the next few months.
In how many states?
10 states.
And you've got the Big West refinery still, I think, don't you?
Yes, in
down
North
here
Salt Lake.
in North Salt Lake. You've got a bank. You've got a credit card company. You've got major portfolio investment in Pilot Flying J, and you're on the board there, I think.
Yes.
and I think you're also on the board of Savage, is that right?
Yes.
You're on our board. Any other boards? You're on the University of Utah board.
Yes.
And I think some theater and dance companies or something like that.
Yeah, but mostly the business boards. I'm not as good on the nonprofit side as I used to be prior to being the position I'm in.
You're a little bit busier.
Yes, I have a lot of boards within our own company.
Yeah.
So.
The Flying J, before it went into bankruptcy, was growing really fast on the top line, but it was sort of profitless growth in the sense that it wasn't adding as much on the bottom line. I think you've shifted that focus, and now you're focused more on sustainable bottom line growth. Is that right?
That is very true, and I actually think it's a very interesting point because when we went into bankruptcy, we were the 16th largest private company, and we had sales of over $20 billion. And at the bottom line, we were making under $200 million off of that $20 billion, which just is not very much when you've got that kind of sales. And today, we probably will do about $2.5 billion across all our, not counting Pilot, because we're a minority interest in Pilot, and I can talk more about that. But just with our businesses that we control, we'll do about $2 billion, and our profitability will be about $400 million. So it's a way different model, for sure.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about Maverick. The name is now on our stadium. We're very proud of it. You've opened up, I think, 3 or 4 new stores here in Cache Valley in the last year and a half, something like that. Talk to us a little bit about what you hope to accomplish with Maverick, and then I do want to drill down on Flying J in a minute.
So Maverick has been a part of our community. Maverick started really getting in the mid-'60s and as service stations, and then has just grown. If you looked at a picture of what our service stations look like in the day, it would be a small little store and a bunch of pumps. And now I hope all of you have been to our brand new stores here in Logan. You probably have a very good feel for what we are today. We really want to be a stop where it's very fun not only to get fuel, but to go in and get food or a cinnamon roll. And we would pride ourselves in being adventure's first stop, and the first place people go before they start whatever that adventure is, whether it's their job or something they're going to do that day. And we really believe that there's opportunity at Maverick, and many would say, well, that's kind of crazy because don't you want to be in a business that overall the industry is growing? And I think there would be some people out there that would say petroleum is not that sort of business. It's declining. And I would actually agree with that in general, petroleum is probably going to decline over our lifetimes. And so we are really focusing and trying to get better at what we do inside the store, because we really hope that you as the public will want to come into our stores and get a quick bite to eat or a cup of coffee or something like that. And we feel that that's more sustainable. And so I think, Doug, if you look over the years, even the last 10, and you looked at our stores, and we call it our vintage of stores, you would see us focusing more that direction. And that's the reason it's really hard to understand the way our world is, how long the legs are on petroleum.
Can you say a little bit more about the concept of Venture's First Stop? How did that get developed, and how's that working for you?
So I can take no credit for that. We bought the company in 2012, and I really bought the company because we had the opportunity to buy it, and because we owned a refinery that serviced a lot of the same markets as Maverick. And my strategic goal was to have a home or outlet for the refinery in case we ever needed it. We operate our businesses very separately, and I hope we never do, but it was an insurance policy for me. What I had no understanding of at the time, back 4 years ago, is that my cousins who were running Maverick back in the early 2000s had come up with this idea of Adventure's First Stop. And they were already theming and building on that and using a filter through their marketing departments to create an experience when you came into the C-stores. And so I quickly learned after buying Maverick what that brand meant, and really have embraced keeping the theming, I would almost call it, and trying as best we can to differentiate ourselves from vanilla C-stores that really they're not fun, they don't have a theme, they're just a name on a sign.
You know, it's impossible not to look at Maverick and realize how much energy, though, is behind the brand right now. I mean, you've put an enormous amount of energy behind it. It's growing. I think it's exciting. You've got a new CEO who reports to you running Maverick. That's Tom Welch, who was famous for...
Wait.
Yeah.
Newsflash.
Uh-oh. Go ahead. What did I
Late
miss?
breaking, we've been really bad about this. We actually had Tom, I was chairman of the board of Maverick, and Tom Welch was running Maverick until the end of September, when my husband, Chuck Maggelet, became president and chief adventure guide. I get in big trouble when I say president, and Tom is chairman of the board.
Okay.
So Tom is still working as a very active chairman of the board, but because of the level of investment that we as a family are putting into Maverick, Chuck is
He's now running it. He's
Yes.
the chief executive officer
Yep.
of
Maverick.
Of Maverick.
Right.
Okay, great. Sorry to miss that.
No, sorry. It's not your fault. We have not announced that officially.
Well, okay, you know, you've mentioned the names of two people now that are very important to you as part of your
Yes.
team.
Yes.
One is Tom, and even more importantly, Chuck. So talk about Chuck and Tom and how you interface with them and their qualities and what it is that they have that complements what you're doing.
Well, that would be an interesting discussion, because I think for me, Chuck, I've been married to Chuck for 23 years, and
Classmate of yours at Harvard
Yes.
Business School, not in the same section.
that's right. Met at a wedding, the typical romantic story a year after graduation. However, sideline, had 3 classes together at Harvard: service management, entrepreneurial management, and real estate, which are all big things that we do every day. But we did not pay attention to each other in those classes at all, and went to a wedding a year later and have been together ever since. Chuck and I did Crystal Inn together, built that company as co-managing directors. When I went into Flying J, because of the situation, Chuck couldn't join as an executive until after we were finished through the bankruptcy, but immediately joined along with me and has worked alongside since 2010 with me. And we have very complementary skills. Chuck is a trained engineer and extremely analytical, and I am much more a marketing kind of person, and really I'm not always as into the details as Chuck would be. So we have provided a great complement to one another throughout the years. It's not always easy because we think very, very differently, and therefore we end up in big debates, but in the end I think that partnership has played out very well because we get to a better answer. Because sometimes when you're at the top of an organization, a lot of people won't always come to you and play devil's advocate, and it's a very important part of being a leader that you can somehow embolden people to be willing to step up and say what they think, and Chuck is not afraid to do that with me, and I'm not afraid to do that with him, and we end up at a great place. Tom Welch is also an amazing leader. He's a very different leader than I am or than Chuck is. Tom, I would say, grows things and is amazing at collaborating with people, and a very big cheerleader and an advocate for whatever he does. And that's been amazing. He's played an amazing role as our president for 3 years, our chief adventure guide, because that's what Maverick needed. We needed to have somebody, as we were beginning to grow and move forward, who was just out there collaborating our employees with people that in towns that we were going to be building in, doing things like working the Maverick Stadium deal. That was what Tom Welch did. Tom brought the Olympics to Utah. An amazing leader of people, and yet a very different leader than I would say that I am or that Chuck is.
I don't think Tom was with Maverick when you acquired it, was it?
Tom was with Maverick in the sense he'd served on the board for 25 years.
Oh, okay.
Which is really why he ended up in the role he did.
I see.
Because it was a very good way. He fit very well and understood Maverick very well.
Yeah. And before that, I think before the Olympics, I think he had a senior role, maybe an executive role with Smith's, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he knew the retail business. He knew all the many thousands and thousands of SKUs you have and all the complexity of all
Exactly.
that. And he's also, I think he's really a people person too.
He is very much a people person.
Yeah. Now, I want to drill down on your experience with Pilot Flying J in just a minute, but I need to say a few things more about you so that we can kind of get, your persona known to the group so that we can drill down on this a little bit. So you lived in Brigham City until you were about 13, I think, is that right?
Yes.
Then you moved to Rexburg, Idaho.
Yes.
And then you moved down to Bountiful and you graduated from Bountiful High School, so you're a Bountiful Brave. Came here to Utah State, and were you here 1 or 2 years? I can't.
2 years.
2 years, and then you went down to Pepperdine in California. You graduated from Pepperdine as the salutatorian of Pepperdine. I have a picture of you with your medal, and went back to work for a couple of years, and then you went to Harvard Business School. That's where you got your MBA, when you were running Crystal Inn with Chuck, you were also having kids.
Yes.
You're a mom.
Yes.
You have 4 children.
Yes.
And you're this very, very busy CEO, and you're at the same time you're having these sort of business arguments with Chuck. You're also a husband and wife and having family. Can you talk a little bit about that and about the family life side of it?
Yes. It's an amazing part of what we are as a couple and we are as a family. I feel very fortunate. And
by the way,
so
your daughter Haley is
Haley's here.
Right over
She'll
here.
get embarrassed that we say that,
Yeah.
but she drove me here this morning, so I appreciate that. And anyway, and Haley's the youngest, one of our twins. But from 1993, to put it into perspective, from 1993, which is when we broke ground on the first Crystal Inn, until 2000, when we opened our 14th Crystal Inn, we had 4 children. So if you run the numbers on that, I had 4 kids in 5 years because I had twins. So I thought I was spacing them really well, but from 1995 to 2000, I had 3 pregnancies and 4 kids. And it was actually quite manageable to have 2 children and work full time and do some travel, especially if you owned the company, because you didn't have there was no one watching over me saying, you can't bring this kid to a meeting or you can't do anything. I realized that if we wanted to have a 3rd child, that I would need to take a different role. I didn't believe it would be fair to children to stay as involved. So when we decided to have a 3rd child, I decided in 2000 that Chuck would run the hotels day to day, and I would take a little bit of a back role for a few years as we raised the kids. So that actually worked really, really well until 2008, when suddenly within 3 weeks I left from that role of really being, with 4 children in that age range, I felt that I needed to be around a lot more, but I had the luxury of still being involved. So if you picture 2000 to 2008, for roughly 8 years, that's when I got on nonprofit boards. I was still involved at Crystal Inn, but I didn't have any day-to-day responsibility. And I would go to meetings at Flying J once a month. They had a management meeting that I would attend, and I would meet with each division of Flying J once a year. They had about 12 divisions. That was kind of what I did to fill my time in those 8 years. So if you were to say to Haley that, your mom was a stay-at-home mom, right? When you're little, I don't think she would say, oh yeah, she was a stay-at-home mom for sure. Although I believe she would say that she noticed a material difference in early 2009, when I began working 60 hours a week and traveling around 50 to 75 nights a year. That was a huge jump.
Yeah.
And very different to the plan, honestly, that I'd had in mind of how I was going to mix family and work and kids. But for me, very selfishly, what came out of that is I learned that I really enjoyed being a working mother much more than I enjoyed being a stay-at-home sort of working mother. And so as we got through the bankruptcy, I went to my kids kind of and said, I know I'm not around as much as I would like to be, but I have 3 daughters, and a son, and I really want to be a different kind of example to you than other moms might be. And I think, and Chuck is a very, very important part of that. If he had not been the kind of partner he's been and had the kind of confidence he has in himself and in our relationship, that never would have worked. We have been very fortunate that we have supported each other all along the way, and that we haven't got competitive with one another, or we haven't felt that one or the other of us wasn't as good at things. We've known when to step in. I would argue now, as Chuck being president of Maverick, that I will have a little bit lesser role potentially, even though in some sense he reports to me because I'm CEO of our holding company. I think that having a day-to-day responsibility like running 5,000 employees and building a business the size of Maverick, that will be a big, big responsibility. And so I will step more into the role of maybe a little more involvement with the family, and he would back off. And that's how our family and career and relationship have ebbed and flowed for over 20 years.
It's a really unique relationship, and it's great to have a model like that really works. We had Gary Crittenden come here a few years ago to speak to our finance club, and I don't know if you know Gary, but Gary is he was the CFO of Citicorp and took Citicorp into their bankruptcy and out of their bankruptcy in the 2008 to 2011-12 timeframe. And Gary is from Ogden. He also went to Harvard Business School, was a Bain consultant, and then ultimately became a CFO for a variety of different companies, including American Express before he went to Citicorp. At any rate, he's had a fascinating career. He now lives here in Salt Lake City. He runs what was called Huntsman Gay Private Equity. I don't know what they call it now. But Gary came and spoke to our finance club, and he was asked to reflect on, what are the sort of most important lessons of his career. Number one lesson, he said, was marry the right person. Sounds like that you could relate to that.
Oh, I 100% believe that. If you want to be married and have a family and work, I believe that 100%.
Yeah. So quick question about Pilot Flying J, and then we'll open up for the group task questions. Tell us a little bit about how that partnership developed, what role that played in the workout of the bankruptcy, and the relationships you have with the Haslam family and what you've learned from them.
So when we went into bankruptcy, all of our competitors called because we didn't have a lot of big competitors, 2 or 3 in the truck stop business, but they all called me within the first couple weeks and said, hey, if you ever sell, if you're going to end up selling, please look us up. Don't forget we're here. We'd love to participate or help in any way we can. And, I listened a little bit, but I definitely did not, when we went into bankruptcy, want to let go of our retail operations. We had a partnership with ConocoPhillips. They owned about 40% of our retail facilities. And our retail facilities at the time were around 250 truck stops, and they were not in bankruptcy. So our holding company was in bankruptcy, and a couple of other companies we had, but CFJ, Conoco Flying J it was called, was not in bankruptcy. So I had a partner, and I haven't shared much of this with you, Doug, really, but I had a partner in Conoco who had been our partner for over 15 years who was very mad at us. They weren't so mad at me, which was really good, but as I became CEO of Flying J, there were some things that were really obvious that needed to be done to have Flying J be more successful and better than it was. And it was extremely hard under the circumstances with Conoco and where our partnership had come and the surprise bankruptcy. They didn't want to do a thing. They wanted to just sit where they were and I would say almost hope for the best. It was like a big corporate bureaucracy, and even though I saw some things that I thought we could do to make the business better, they didn't want to change anything, and so, or very few things. So when I met with Jimmy, well, okay, so, and we were in a lawsuit. Flying J was in a lawsuit with Pilot, and I was advised not to meet with Jimmy because
Jimmy Haslam.
The Haslam family is another family out of Knoxville, Tennessee, and they owned Pilot. Jimmy is the one running the CEO of the company, and he had wanted to meet with me very badly in January-ish. Mm-hmm. And we were in a lawsuit. Fast forward to June. Finally, I agree. I was supposed to go to Knoxville and meet with him. I called him and said I wasn't coming. And finally, he stopped in Salt Lake, and we met at a restaurant. They had paper tablecloths, and he started outlining for me what he would do if we merged our two companies together. And ironically, and he didn't know this, but he was saying exactly the things that I knew we needed to do that Conoco wouldn't allow me to do, which was very compelling. Plus, he had 35 years of experience in the industry, and I had very little day-to-day experience in the industry. And we are in bankruptcy, and I was talking to many people who were loan-to-own type people who were saying, we'll pay you almost pennies on the dollar, and, that's it in the story. Jimmy was telling me he understood the value of our brand of Flying J, and he was willing to even pay us a forward-looking EBITDA number, even though we were in bankruptcy. And we began to build an amazing partnership and trust in one another that continues today through those negotiations, because we basically struck a deal, I guess you call it the old-fashioned way, two people over a table. And I walked away from that meeting, and suddenly I felt better about potentially merging our retail facilities. The Haslam family was going to allow us to be a partner. I would only take out as much cash from our merger/sell as we needed to pay people back, and stay in the partnership with as much ownership as we could. And we would have board seats. And at the time, that was extremely important to me because Flying J was our brand. It was a public brand, and it was painful for me. And also, I felt the employees would have a much better shot, even though it wasn't ideal, because our Ogden employees, about 200 people, would likely lose their job unless they wanted to move to Knoxville, Tennessee, which very few did, a few. And so we went into that partnership I don't think either of us understood what that company would be together. It has become an amazing, it's now the 6th or 7th largest private company in the United States, and the profitability is double to 3 times as much as we were independent. So it's phenomenal.
You've mentioned how important trust relationships are in business, and you've talked about the relationship you have with your husband, with Tom Welsh, with other people you've worked with. The absence of that relationship with Conoco, which really was a drag on your ability to get anything done, and then the way in which you built a trust relationship with Jimmy Haslam. The Haslam family went through some tough times after you joined that partnership with them, and you're on their board, and there were some issues that became, there were some criminal issues, I think.
Yes.
That they had to contend with and deal with. Talk a little bit about that and how that, what you learned from that experience.
Well, obviously it was extremely shocking and very sad to me when I felt that we'd put the brand, our family brand, in the hands of another family, and then to find out that potentially there were issues with the way they were treating their customers, which I have always been a big advocate that I want everyone treated fairly, and obviously I wanted to pay everybody back in the bankruptcy. So initially, for a minute, I was disappointed.
Can you just describe what the issue was?
The issue was that the sales team would go to customers and they would offer a rebate, and the pricing for the fuel was done through the home office, kind of on an Excel spreadsheet. It was all done manual. And so the customers' expectations of what those rebates would be were very hard for them to calculate themselves. And so individual salespeople within pilot Flying J, who were on a commission basis, would look at this Excel worksheet of what the people were supposed to get, which was manually calculated, and they would adjust those rebates based on what they thought that customer expected, not on what the customer's actual deal had been. So if I was supposed to get 2 cents back off of the retail price, and the salesperson thought, oh, I know that person, they're probably expecting to get a check for X, but they won't even question us if we pay Y. And so this went on with the sales force, very much within the ranks of the sales force for a period of 7-8 years. And the question when this all came back, Pilot Flying J was raided by the FBI on April 15th in 2013 with guns, jackets, everything. The person I know, Jimmy Haslam, was completely shocked, had no idea that this sort of thing was going on. And of course, for me, when I heard about this, my first thought really was very selfishly, oh my gosh, now Flying J is going to get tainted again. It's tainted with the bankruptcy. I thought we put the brand in a good place, and it's going to be tainted again. And frankly, still is a little tainted by that. But the Haslam family, I really do believe that I believe in them as a family. And it was a big company, and I have been there when other people did things on my behalf.
What did they do to make it right, and what was your role as a board member during that period of time, and from a governance point of view?
The Haslam family really, from the very beginning that it happened, went out very boldly in public. Jimmy did, and he's a very public person. You guys have maybe seen him. He owns the Chicago Browns, not Chicago Browns, Cleveland Browns. And he went out very quickly that they would make things right, and they did. They paid over $60 million back to people. They brought in all the internal auditors from out in the field to go over every single account in detail, and they sent people checks to make up that difference right away. So that was extremely encouraging to me, and they really did step to the plate to make it right.
And the family is, his brother's governor, right?
That's right.
Governor of Tennessee.
Yes. They're
And
very
the University of Tennessee's business school is the Haslam Business School.
Yes.
So they have a brand that they want to protect as well.
They do. They're an amazing family
and
partner.
so this was an example of you can't always in business you like to think you're in control of everything. You're not always in control of everything, but what you can control is how you respond to the challenges when they come.
I think that's very true, and it really, the bigger that your enterprises and businesses become, the more that you have to be willing to trust people. Mm-hmm. And in my case, I feel like inevitably at some point you do get burned, and it really does come back to how you take care of that once that happens, because it's very likely to happen. It's very hard to know and be able to know every little thing about everyone that is working for you when you grow bigger. And if you want to become a bigger and bigger organization and employ more and more people, you have to fundamentally have trust. And you can't lose that trust.
You know, you've been through it twice with the Haslam's situation, and then with your own situation with taking Flying J in and out of bankruptcy and paying off all those loans with interest. Can you isolate any one or two or three influences in your life that caused you to feel so passionate about that's what was the right thing to do? And I have to say it's pretty unusual, I think.
Yeah, I believe a lot of it was my dad's influence, mm-hmm. and watching my mom and her what she did with the business. But my dad, the one thing he would always say is that you had to do everything with integrity. Mm-hmm. And he was a stickler on honesty. He really believed that some of the key components of being a good leader and a good person were to listen to people, wholeheartedly listen, and to approach everything you did in an honest way. And he was a big advocate of deals, the best deals being when both parties on both sides really are happy with the deal when it's over. Yeah. And I watched that, and I watched the people, not just my dad, I watched the executives around him lived that culture and philosophy in early Flying J, and I really liked it, and I believed in it. I felt if you run your life that way, I still believe today, in the end, you're going to get ahead. And the other thing that doesn't tie directly to that, but I thought you might be asking me, is did I see anything that would have alerted me to these sorts of things happening within the companies? And even though you didn't ask me that, Doug, I'm going to answer that question. That one of the things that I think these two incidences that I saw happen within these two great companies happened because of ego. And in my opinion, because people who were in positions of leadership took advantage of that leadership and got too big for their self. They believe, and I think that's extremely dangerous and usually doesn't end well.
Yeah, that comes straight out from the Greeks, right? Hubris. Pride goes before the fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Well, let's open it up to the group to ask questions.
Hi. So I've actually interned for Maverick last 2 summers, and I'm an adventure guide right now. I don't know, I was in the groups this last summer with the interns.
Oh, great, yeah.
So one question I never got to ask was, what's one takeaway from your education that you felt like affected your leadership? Because I kind of saw the leadership from FJM kind of all the way down to the store level.
Right.
And I just want to know if there's anything from Utah State or Pepperdine or Harvard that you felt like really influences how that's happened and how the leadership has been so effective.
The biggest takeaway really was my education at Harvard and the case study method. So no one particular class or discipline, but the fact that every day you read 3 or 4 cases and you had to go in with ideas and plans, and that was my life during the bankruptcy. It was just boom, 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 and you had to make decisions quick, and you had to rely on other people's reports, and I believe the case study method, for me in particular, that was huge because life is a bunch of case studies. And so if you've been trained kind of how to get in there and find the important things quickly and move on, make decisions, and I think that's what the way that Harvard teaches taught me. That's what by far the biggest takeaway throughout my education.
Thank you.
Did you like our internship? Okay.
Oh yeah, that was great.
Cool. Okay.
Waiting for the microphone. Feels like a long walk. Hi, Crystal.
Hi.
I have a question about multi-brand management. I have some experience with the company that I run where we have, essentially we have our hands in a number of different brands.
It's in
that we develop.
Rexburg, by the way.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
This is an MBA student here.
Okay, cool.
So just up the road. We try to give
I was
those.
just there on Sunday.
Well, it's a good place to be right now.
Yeah.
It's unseasonably warm,
Yeah.
which is nice. But so we have this family of brands that we're currently developing. I've been doing it for about 9 years. And one of the issues that we have been running into has been basically trying to navigate all of those different brands. And I'm assuming that Crystal-Lyn, when you moved into FJ Management, that Crystal-Lyn then became part of the FJ Management family, if it wasn't before. And so now you've got your very horizontal. You've got your hotels, and you've got your oil production, and then you've got your distribution. You've got your convenience stores. So it's some of it's vertical, but a lot of it's horizontal. How do you find the right people, and how do you manage this brand portfolio that spans this large scale of everything from boring, come buy our crude, all the way down to adventure and convenience stores?
So a couple different things. First of all, the way we're structured in the whole, what I call our holding company, FJ Management, that I would say governs all of those companies. So just from a governance standpoint, every one of those companies has an executive team and a board independent of the holding company. So that's one answer on the governance side. I really wanted to make sure on the cultural side that these companies all were being, I guess for lack of a better word, branded the same. So almost on a internal culture aspect. And so after that happened, and we kind of looked and said, okay, we do have companies that are owned by the same stockholders, and Crystalline was not one of them. Now we've recently had to take Tab out. It has a little bit different ownership. So we have kind of this,
That's your
we
bank,
do have,
your
right.
bank.
We do have a hodgepodge of ownerships, but it's largely our family. But the one thing, we wanted to have one common mission, and we got people together about 4 years ago from each of the companies and came up with an overall mission that's building value to last. And we feel that fits across all of our companies. And then along with that, we came up with 3 guiding principles, which even though they're a bit generic, and you'll go, yeah, Crystal, a lot of companies have those. They're integrity, mutual respect, and operations excellence. And those can fit really about any organization. And it's a work in process, but we really try, if you come to our offices in Salt Lake, our main office where I work, you'll see building value to last, and you'll see these guiding principles. And we talk about them a lot at the FJM level. I have to say, as you get down in the organization, Maverick is Adventure's First Stop and Living Legendary, and you've got different things going on in all the different companies. So, but from my perspective, I'm always talking about building value to last and our 3 guiding principles, and making sure that our management teams understand that. We have a leadership forum once a year where the presidents and their direct reports from each of our companies all come together. We have it in January, and that's when I talk a lot about our overall culture. And I am very proud that I think we've made very good progress on that. But that's the way we manage those different brands. We don't try to figure out one certain common thread, but from a culture perspective, I want to make sure, like mutual respect, that all our companies are treating our customers and their fellow employees with respect and being honest and doing the best job operationally that they can.
Thank you.
So it sounds like going to Harvard may have not always been like in your sights. Being such a prestigious business school, what do you think it was about you, like your experiences and who you were, that allowed you to get accepted and be appealing to them? And what advice would you have for students aspiring to do something similar?
I think that and Doug, you'd have a lot of knowledge around this, and I could be totally wrong, but in the day when I went to Harvard, being a woman from Utah and applying to Harvard was unique. So I had that going for me. And then
It still is.
yeah, it is. It
still
hasn't
is.
changed a whole
Yeah.
lot. I had decent work experience. That was critical. I don't think that's changed a
No.
lot. I think you really have got to have great work experience. And I had done well academically in undergrad. And if I looked at my classmates around me, I would always feel like everybody had 3 things, at least 3 things. They had great academics, where at undergrad, they had amazing work experience, and they had something else. And my something else, I always thought, and I could be wrong, was I was a woman from Utah. Other people might have been a champion figure skater or an amazing singer or had started their own company, but that was my simplistic view when people ask me that question. I actually think in today's world, and it is it's so competitive, and you might want to add more to that as far as today what it's like. But I think it is just setting yourself apart as best you can, and it's a hard thing to do, but it's again, it goes back to taking every opportunity you can when it comes along, it's a very competitive environment to try to get into these top schools. However, because you have deans like Doug, I should say Dean Anderson.
No.
You have deans like Dean Anderson who are making schools like Utah State into schools like Harvard, and it's amazing. And so I think into the future, as it gets more and more and more competitive to go to the top 5 or 10 schools, people will start needing to look deeper, and they probably already do, into the schools that are created by other individuals and patterned, I would argue a little bit maybe patterned after some of those great schools. And I know the Huntsman family really is committed to having Utah State become the Western Wharton. That's awesome, right? And they're putting money behind what they say. So yes, there's, as I give advice how to get into the what are considered to be the top schools, I really do think it's very difficult. You have to set yourself apart. And even if you do all those things, it becomes very random. And so I think make sure that as you pursue that you don't get too disappointed if it doesn't work out that way, and just keep your eye out for these other up-and-coming great programs where you might find yourself a lot less in debt with a great education and just maybe not quite the name. But I think that it is a difficult task. I don't mean to be like negative about it, but the reality of it. Do you want to?
Well, I think I would echo everything that you said. And I would encourage, first of all, I really do think, it's a great thing to try to strive to go to the very best program that you can. And because there is a randomness element to it, I think you need to apply to a number of them. I have two nephews that got into Harvard Business School. It had absolutely nothing to do with me. But they didn't get into Wharton, But I've known people who've gotten into Wharton who didn't get into Harvard Business School. So you just never know. There
right.
is certain randomness to about it. I just, Crystal knows this, but I don't know if every one of you knows. I just taught at Harvard Business School last semester for a semester. I taught a course in the required curriculum in the first year called Leadership and Corporate Accountability. I have 93 students in Section J, and they are amazing students. But you know what? You guys are amazing too, and you should think of yourself as amazing and really strive for the very best opportunities you can get. I think Crystal is right. I think being from Utah gives you, both the women and the men, an opportunity. There are not that many of them back there. There was one in my section who was from Utah. We actually have a Utah State grad, a Huntsman School graduate this year who's in the first year of the Harvard program. His name's Craig Mon. He grew up in Wellsville. After he graduated from here, he had some amazing experiences in work. He worked for 2 years at Zion's. And then he worked for a major consumer packaging company for 3 years before he went to Harvard. And he was he worked on the Walmart team down in Bentonville, Arkansas. And I told the dean of the Harvard Business School that they had admitted a great young graduate from Utah State University, and we intended to send a lot more of them their way. So, follow in Crystal's path, follow in Craig's path. And, don't think that, I really have to say that if you get accepted at Harvard Business School, don't think that you've arrived. That's a great opportunity, but that doesn't mean you're God, It's this point you made about pride.
Right.
There's a very famous guy who graduated at the top of his class from Harvard Business School called Jeff Skilling, and he's in prison right now because he was in charge of Enron when it destroyed so much.
I think there's a lot that goes unsaid about HBS or other business school graduates.
Sure.
And I do think the ego part plays in a lot of cases, and there's
Huge.
a lot of carnage along the way from people who have had those sorts of degrees too. But it doesn't get talked about as much as the success story.
You have to be very, very careful about that. The other thing I would say, if you don't get accepted to Harvard Business School, you shouldn't feel like a failure or a reject. It's just one door that didn't open up, but there are a gazillion other doors that can open up for you.
That's right.
So.
First thing, I'm sorry I'm so underdressed for this event.
No.
Second, a sincere welcome back to Utah State University from a member of a fraternity to a member of a sorority.
All right.
Shout out to Alpha Chi.
All right, thanks.
And my third question, my real question is, when you were giving this presentation the entire time, someone around me commented, you never referred to your husband as husband. You always said partner. And I'm just wondering if that was rhetorically chosen or if it was a coincidence. And if it was rhetorically chosen, was it because the word husband gives a connotation that you are a wife and not an equal? And for anyone who is a minority going into upper level business, what is your advice on that?
You know, I don't do that on purpose. I'm proud to have a husband, but I really do think of him so much like my partner that I do just subconsciously refer to him as my partner, especially in an environment like this. But I've never actually had anybody call me out on it, and that's interesting because I have to admit that I'm a little bit traditional when it comes to relationships, and our home life is a bit traditional, actually. And so I do come from an upbringing, I'm 52 years old, where there was a husband, a wife, a dad, a mom. You know, my mom I happened to end up working because my parents got divorced when I was 10. But I really do believe that our relationship is successful because we're partners at home and at work. And that's why I really like to refer to it that way, because it's so much how I feel. And the second part about minority advice, is that what it was? Advice for minorities going forward?
Any minority who's striving to defy the odds of becoming someone who
You know, I think the biggest thing that anyone can do if they find themselves in that situation is look in the mirror and know that they're just another person and think of themselves as such. So I think just doing the best you can do and being the best you can be all the time will get you places. And sometimes at least I can speak from being a woman in a man's world in petroleum, I really haven't thought of myself as a woman in a man's world. I've just thought of myself as a business person in a room full of a bunch of business people. And that's worked well for me. So I think sometimes people and again, I haven't walked in everyone's shoes, and I don't want to act like I don't think it's tough for some people out there. But for me, I have found just not focusing on that aspect, actually, many times it can play in a person's favor, I think, if you don't focus on it. Because sometimes people don't always know how to deal with the woman in the room. And if you conduct yourself in a professional manner, and in my case, I'm a woman. I want to act like a woman. I'm going to act and dress and be a woman, even if I'm in a room of men. And if you're in a room of men and all the men always deal with the men, and they all of a sudden don't quite know how to deal with you. So if you're negotiating, you might actually have an advantage in that. So I've always tried to look at it more as I have an advantage being the only one, rather than, this is terrible that I'm the only one and I'm not being treated fair and I'm not, and so I kind of approach it as an advantage, not a disadvantage. It's always been an advantage. I mean, I'll speak personally. It's always been an advantage to me to be a woman in business. It really, I don't view it as a disadvantage.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, so when you took on that responsibility of getting FJM out of so much debt, like you said, you thought it was 400 that turned up being 1.8. I mean, for college students that have student debt, I mean, I get stressed when I look at that I have $10,000 in debt. I mean, you guys were 1.8 billion. Did that and I get super stressed out about that. Did that take a stress level on you and your family? Or, I mean, how did you go about the steps as far as getting through that and being able to manage it in the way that you did it so quickly? What was the steps for that, and did it take a toll on your family or the company?
So I would say I didn't focus on, I actually did not know that amount until we paid it out, by the way. So I knew the piece parts of it, but I didn't. I had this 400 million in my mind, and then we had debt that we had to refinance. And anyway, so I never totally knew that number, but I knew there was a huge task at hand. And from a restructure standpoint, we had businesses losing money, and I knew we had a pipeline and we had a refinery that were clearly bleeding. And I wanted to sell them as quickly as possible and get that bleeding gone. So that was pretty basic stuff. Exploration and Production Company was a smaller company. I needed to show the creditors committee that I was walking the walk and talking the talk when I said I wanted to pay people back. And so when they said, well, why won't you put this company up for sale? We did. And it was really totally a token of that's a small little thing to do that'll show them I really want to do this. And then so I just took really one step at a time, one day at a time, and I really, really, really in my heart and soul believed we had the assets we needed to pay people back. I didn't know exactly how we would do it, but I really believed that we had these businesses. We only had a couple businesses losing money, so we had great profitable businesses. We just did find ourselves in the perfect storm. And we ran out of cash. I mean, it's very, and the line got drawn in the sand, and we were able to function on our own cash flows going forward. So I had all those things going for me. For me, I was very lucky because Crystalline was not part of the Flying J family. It was owned by the same people, but for our family, Crystalline suddenly was a lot bigger deal, even though it was teeny, 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 tiny compared to Flying J. For my brother and my stepmother and myself, suddenly that business was pretty important. And so I could focus on that was my business in my life, and even if everything blew up, we would still have Crystalline, and that was huge for me to have that backstop. And so I could just go to work every day and try to approach it one step at a time, and that's basically what I did. And I tried to listen to every idea. I mean, I would never, in the beginning of the bankruptcy, there's no way that I would have thought we would, the retail stores I would have been hanging on, kicking, screaming before I would do that. I would sell every other thing we had before that when I went in. And then 6 months later, exactly what are we doing? A deal came along, I listened, we merged, and it's become, probably the best decision in a business front that I've ever made in my life.
It's an incredible story, really a remarkable story. I want to ask the final question. So you graduated from college in '86, is that right?
Yes.
So 20 years ago. And
30. I'm like, wait, I just went to my 25th Harvard visit.
So my gosh, how time flies.
I know.
30 years ago. What is it that you know today that you would like to have known and did not know 30 years ago when you were sitting in classes in college?
I think I would have liked to have known that my life was going to turn out the way it has and not worried so much about the process. Because as I expressed in the beginning, I wanted to do well, but I had no clue what to do. So I didn't have this I'm going to go start a business, or I'm going to go, and I had the pressure, I felt the pressure. My parents didn't put pressure on me. In fact, my dad would say, you don't need to work for the company. It's ironic that he'd say that. It's our company, but you don't need to come to work here. My mom was a lot the same with her business. But I put this pressure on myself that I wanted to be better than my parents were, or to strive to be better. And I worried about it, and I thought about it. And I think that was really wasted time, because if I would have just realized that fundamentally how I started this discussion, just going along, doing the right things, getting good grades, opportunities will come your way, and any time you spend worrying and thinking about it along the way is just time you wasted from educating yourself and waiting for that opportunity, or looking. And it's not like sometimes they don't get dumped in your lap, but looking and listening and talking, and just don't worry. I think that's what I would have liked to have known. It's all going to turn out if you do the right things and you work hard. It's all going to work out in the end, and you're going to have a very happy life.
Fabulous. Thank you, Crystal.